Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning, to our league members who are here with us, and to the public who have taken time from their Saturday morning to get some information about the propositions that will appear on your ballot in this election. My name is Rosette Garcia, and I am joined by my friend and fellow league member, Mandy Butler. I'd like to take a moment to tell you a little bit about the league. We are a 102-year-old nonpartisan community organization. We are dedicated to encouraging informed and active participation in government at all levels. We work to influence public policy through education and advocacy on important issues. I'd like to emphasize that the League never supports or opposes any political party or candidate. We are a strictly nonpartisan organization. For those of you in the audience this morning who are not yet League members, I encourage you to visit our website, lwvncsd.org. Take a look around and consider joining us as a member or perhaps making a donation to us. As I said, we're a member-only, all-volunteer organization. Oh, I'm sorry.
What's going on?
There we go. So here is a slide with some important information and websites that you can go to get all election-related information. First of all, you need to be registered to vote. There's the website to check your status if you're unsure about that. The deadline to register is October 24th, but you should know that you can still register and vote at any vote center in the county up until election day. You would register and file a provisional ballot even after the deadline to register to vote. If you are registered to vote, you will probably have already received a ballot in the mail, and you can track your ballot at where'smyballot.sos.ca.gov. Next slide. So once you receive your ballot, you can return it in several ways. You can mail it, you can drop it at a drop box, or you can visit a vote center. We no longer have the typical polling places that we used to have, but we have over 200 vote centers located throughout San Diego County where you can vote in person. And there you can use accessible machines if you need one. You can get help and materials in a number of languages. And you should know that many vote centers will be open 10 days before Election Day, and all will be opened 3 days before Election Day. So you invited us here. You are here because you want to hear about the ballot measures. Ballot measures can make new laws, change existing laws, and sometimes change the California Constitution. They can be placed on your ballot by interested parties who collect enough signatures to qualify, or they can be placed on the ballot by our elected officials, the legislature, your city council, county board of supervisors. A state proposition passes and becomes law if it receives more than 50% yes votes. You do not need to vote for every measure or candidate, and leaving a blank on your ballot will not invalidate it. The votes that you did cast would be counted. In our presentation for each ballot measure, we will be giving you some background. We will be describing the proposition. We'll also tell you what the supporters are saying, what the opponents are saying about each proposition, and then we'll give you some information about how much money has been spent to pass or defeat the proposition. Many people in our audiences find this some of the most interesting information. So a quick disclaimer before we get started. The arguments, as I said, we're going to be telling you about what the supporters and opponents are saying. This information is published in the official voter information guide, and it comes from the supporters and opponents. We cannot vouch for the accuracy of their statements, and nor do they represent the League's viewpoint. But we want you to understand that and to keep in mind that these statements are likely to be opinions and may not necessarily be based on facts. So finally, I just want to reiterate that we are here just to provide you some information and not to persuade you to vote for or against. The decision on how you vote is yours and yours alone. We encourage you to use the votersedge.org website to see your ballot, and including details about the money that's been spent for each of these measures. This morning, we'll be covering 7 state propositions, 1 countywide proposition, and 6 local city propositions. We're going to stop after we presented the statewide and countywide measures, and we'll take questions there. You can put your questions in the Q&A that you'll find. There's a little Q&A thing at the bottom of your screen. Click on that, and you can enter your questions at any time throughout our talk. And then we'll stop, like I said, at the end of the state propositions and the countywide proposition. We'll take questions then. And then we'll proceed with the local city propositions. And they are a Carlsbad, an Encinitas, a Solana Beach, and 3 Escondido measures. So with that, we'll start with Prop 1. Prop 1 would amend the California Constitution by adding a specific right for reproductive freedom, including the use of including access to abortion and the use of contraceptives. This proposition was placed on the ballot by a vote of the legislature. So let's start with some background. Prior to 1973, abortions were prohibited in 33 states and only allowed in special circumstances in 13 others, and it was legal in 4 states. In 1973, the Roe v. Wade case, the Supreme Court decided that the US Constitution guaranteed a right to privacy and thus to legalize abortion. After that ruling, a variety of court challenges allowed states to place some limitations on abortion, but since 1973, the Supreme Court continued to uphold the right for a person to obtain an abortion. In the Dobbs case this year, the Supreme Court issued a decision in June that overturned Roe v. Wade and eliminated federal protection of abortion rights. The basis for this decision was that rights that are not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution must be deeply rooted in history and tradition in order for them to be guaranteed. So the decision about whether abortion should be legal or not and under what circumstances was returned to the states for them to decide. California law currently recognizes the right to privacy in its Constitution and recognizes the right to reproductive freedom in both statutory and case law. So if passed, Proposition 1 would amend the California Constitution to specifically prohibit the state from denying or interfering with an individual's reproductive freedom, which includes their fundamental right to have an abortion and to use contraceptives. The intention of this amendment is to strengthen the constitutional right to privacy and the constitutional right to equal protection. Proposition 1 would keep abortion and the use of contraception legal in the state as they currently are. So no fiscal impact to the state budget because there would be no change to the way the state pays for contraceptives and abortion services. All that would remain the same as it is now. So here on the slide, you'll see a list on the left of groups and individuals who support this proposition and this amendment. And what they say is that California can no longer count on the federal government to protect our rights. So the state must enshrine the fundamental right to abortion and contraception in our state constitution as extra protection. The law would ensure that only future state voters, not politicians or justices, could alter those rights. They also point to the fact that doctors, nurses, and health providers agree that it is necessary to keep reproductive medical decisions where they belong, with individuals and their healthcare providers, based on medical and scientific facts and not on political arguments. Opponents, and you'll see the list there, say that women already have the right to choose an abortion under current law, and that the US Supreme Court ruling would not change this. They don't see any need to change our state constitution, and they argue that the fetus has rights, which should also be protected. So here are the numbers. You can see how much money has been raised in the campaign to pass Prop 1 as of yesterday. We just updated this slide yesterday. So nearing about $13 million and a little over $140,000 on the no side. So to wrap it all up, if you vote yes on Prop 1, it means that the California Constitution would be amended to expressly include rights to reproductive freedom. A no vote means that you do not want the California Constitution to change, and the rights would continue under other state laws. And with that, I will turn it over to Mandy for the next measure.
Okay. I'm going to actually cover both Proposition 26 and 27 together because they both deal with gambling, changing gambling laws in the state. They're two of the most confusing, I think, and the most expensive propositions on the ballot. Supporters gathered signatures to put these propositions on the ballot at a cost of around $11 for Prop 26 and about $19 for Prop 27. So first, let's talk a little bit about what the current laws are regarding gambling in California. So the California Constitution generally prohibits gambling, but over the years, the Constitution has been amended to allow certain forms of gambling in certain specific locations. So in the California lottery and card rooms in which games similar to poker are played are legal, and betting at horse races is also legal. In Native American-owned casinos, slot machines and certain card games are also allowed. On the other hand, sports betting, general sports betting in California is illegal. The US Supreme Court did end the federal prohibition on sports betting in 2018, which opened the door for states to legalize the practice, and about 35 states have done so far. But the California legislature has not passed any legislation regarding sports betting, and thus these initiatives are placed on the ballot by groups who are interested in seeing that happening. The lack of legal sports betting does not mean it's not happening. There's an unpublished study from 2019 that estimated that Californians were betting billions of dollars on sports, either through bookies or offshore companies. Just as a side note, while Native American casinos do not pay state or local taxes, they do pay state and local governments a fee based on their casino revenue that's been negotiated by each individual tribe. Some tribes do distribute a portion of their profits to tribal members, in which case tribal members pay tax to the federal government. So what would happen then with 26? What would 26 change? First of all, 26 would legalize in-person sports betting at some designated places, which includes Native American casinos and 4 of the licensed racetracks in California. That would include Del Mar Racetrack. At racetracks, sports betting could only be offered to people 21 and older, but at the casinos, age restrictions would have to be negotiated by California's governor in each tribe and written into each tribe's specific compact with the state. 10% of the sports betting profits, the daily sports betting profits, would go to the state, and casinos would pay required fees to state and local governments. The other thing this proposition would do would be legalize roulette and dice games, such as craps at tribal casinos. Another fact of the proposition is that it would create a new way of enforcing gaming laws, which would allow anyone to bring lawsuits if they think of a law is being broken. But any resulting settlement would go to the state. The fiscal impacts are not certain, but state revenue would probably increase to the tune of tens of millions of dollars each year. Again, it's difficult to know exactly how much for a few reasons. Since the tribal state compacts are done individually, they would have to be, again, renegotiated. And it's not clear how much money the state might receive as a result of private lawsuits. After regulatory costs, the profits, the money to the state would go to general funding, the 70% to the general fund, which mandates educational spending, 15% would go to gambling enforcement, and 15% to problem gaming and mental health research. Now, who's supporting this? If we look at here, are the people on the left are the people who are supporting this, or the groups that are supporting this. They argue that Prop 26 will continue to aid the Native American tribes in developing self-sufficiency and lifting them out of poverty. Casino revenue is mostly used to enhance schools, housing, public safety, and Native American community programs. Supporters say that in-person sports betting or wagering will allow the casinos to offer additional games, which will also bring in more revenue for the state. California casinos currently create 150,000 jobs, and obviously those could increase. Finally, supporters of Proposition 26 say that it will provide the strongest age verification safeguards and will strengthen enforcement of California's gaming laws. However, there are opponents to 26. You can see them on the left side of the slide. These opponents say expansion of gambling will lead to more gambling addiction. They point out that Proposition 26 is sponsored by 5 wealthy gaming tribes that want to expand the monopoly on gaming. Opponents also say that these powerful tribes will use their interest to use new legal enforcement provisions to put existing non-tribal card rooms out of business, costing jobs and income loss in these communities, which are primarily lower income. Opponents also say Prop 26 will expand gaming at racetracks to save an industry that harms or injures horses. And finally, opponents argue that jobs at tribal casinos are non-union and offer few benefits and little job security. And here's the money slide. As you can see, a fair amount of money has been spent for both for and against this proposition, and you can see the groups that have donated. I'll just give you a minute to look at those. Many of the groups that have donated against this proposition are, the main donators are card rooms. And you can see the main supporters are Native American tribes. Okay, so yes means that tribal casinos and the state's legal licensed horse racetracks could offer in-person sports betting. Private civil lawsuits can be filed if the laws are being violated and the Justice Department declines to act. No means sports betting would continue to be illegal in California, and casinos would not be able to offer roulette and dice games. Okay, so how does 27 differ from 26? The main difference here is online. So 27 would allow licensed tribes or gambling companies who pay licensing fees. It'd be 10 million for tribes and 100 million for the gambling companies to offer online sports betting over the internet and mobile devices to people over 21 years of age and older, and on non-tribal lands in California. The state would receive 10% of the monthly sports betting profits, a portion of which would go to fund homelessness and mental health programs. A new state unit would be created to regulate online sports betting, and new ways to reduce illegal online sports betting would be developed. The fiscal impact, again, depends on a number of variables, such as the number of entities that offer online betting, the renegotiation of compacts between the state and the tribes that offer online betting, and the number of people that engage in online betting. But operating profits after prize payments, federal taxes, regulatory costs would be taxed at 10%. Plus, there are those licensing fees I mentioned. There is potential for increase in state revenue from hundreds of millions up to about 500 million each year. And all of the regulatory costs would be offset by the payments sports betting operators must pay to the state for regulation. So who's supporting this? Again, you can see the groups on the left of the slide. They say that it would provide hundreds of millions of dollars to support programs that address issues of homelessness, mental health, and addiction in California. And they point out that online sports betting is already occurring in California through offshore operators and bookies. Supporters believe gambling should be legal in California, as it is in many other states. Prop 27 will also give those tribes who can afford the operating fees even more revenue for their tribes. Who's against this? You can see those are on the left again on the slide. The opponents say that Prop 27 is being pushed by the out-of-state gambling industry. The billions of dollars in revenue will go to their companies and not stay here in California. Many tribes with casinos and smaller card rooms are concerned that they will lose clients and as a result lose jobs and revenue if Prop 27 passes. Opponents expressed concern, like for 26, that if gambling is available on a mobile device or online, gambling will be easier and will increase gambling addiction, which is a major cause of bankruptcy and homelessness. In addition, opponents say the 20-year-old age requirement will be difficult to regulate. Finally, they say legalizing online gambling to pay for social ills like homelessness is not a solution. Here again is the money slide. You can see that a lot of money has been spent by both supporters and opponents on this proposition. I'll leave that up for a second so you can see who those groups are. And then just to summarize, yes means licensed tribes or gambling companies could offer online sports betting over the internet and mobile devices to people 20 years of age and older on non-tribal lands in California. No means sports betting would continue to be illegal in California. No change would be made to the way the state gambling laws are enforced. Just quickly to summarize and compare these two, Prop 26 allows in-person sports betting at casinos and 4 racetracks and allows roulette and dice games at casinos. The profits for the state, these funds would go first to mandated K through 12 funding in the general fund. Prop 27 allows online and mobile sports betting at any location. And the no money would go to K to 12 funding. Instead, after operational costs and fees, the profits would be divided 85% to homelessness and mental health programs and 15% to other tribes that have casinos. The similarities are that both limit sports betting on non-tribal lands to those 21 and older, and both provide regulation for new regulation of laws for new gaming laws. If they both pass, they both could take effect. But if a court finds that parts of the propositions are in conflict, the provisions of the one that received the most yes votes will prevail. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Proposition 28.
Thank you, Mandy. Whew, a lot on those two gambling propositions, but I hope that helped clarify some things for you all. So on to Prop 28. Additional funding for arts and music education. This proposition would require the state to set aside some of its revenue to fund arts and music education in K through 12 public schools. It's an initiative statute. Supporters gathered signatures at a cost of about $10.40 per signature. So some background. Our public schools serve about 6 million K through 12 students. Roughly 60% of California public students are from low-income families. going to remind you about proposition Prop 98, which passed in 1988. And it changed the California Constitution, requiring that a minimum percentage of the state budget, the money that's in the general fund, must be spent on K through 14 education. So K through 12 plus community colleges. But it did not guarantee any annual funding specifically for arts and music education in K-12 public schools. However, state law requires schools to provide arts and music instruction to all students in grades 1 through 6. In middle school or junior high, grades 7 and 8, students have to be offered art and music as an elective. And then in high school, students must complete 1 year of arts or music in order to graduate. So here's what would happen if Prop 28 were to pass. It would require the state to provide funding specifically for arts and music education in K through 12 schools. This funding would be in addition to the funding already guaranteed generally to K through 12 education that's required, mandated by Prop 98. The amount that the state would be required to fund would be equal to 1% of the funding received by schools from Prop 98 in the previous year. So 1% of the amount that the schools received from Prop 98 would have to be, it's not coming out of Prop 98, it's coming out of the general fund, but it would go to schools for arts and music. It would be divvied up this way. 70% would be allocated to schools based on enrollment, the number of students that they have. 30% of that money would be allocated to schools based on the proportion of students from low-income households. And the school's principal would decide how that funding is spent. And schools with more than 500 students would have other specific requirements. And each year school boards would have to certify how they spent their money and that it was in fact used on music and arts education. And it would be reported publicly. So the fiscal impact on the state and local governments is it's likely to increase spending of $800 million to $1 billion each year in funding for arts and music. But to put this into context, this amount represents less than 1/2 of 1% of the state's general fund. So here you have a list of supporters, and here's what they say. They like the fact that it would increase funding for educational programs without raising taxes. They point out that only 1 in 5 California public schools has a dedicated teacher for arts or music programs, compared to other states, such as New York, where over 75% of schools have designated instructors for arts and music. They say that studies show that arts and music education improves personal lives, and it's enriching, and it also improves academic potential and will provide skills that could lead to employment opportunities. There's your list of opponents, and they say that this is not a way to create a budget for schools. They say that requiring a set amount for music and art education reduces the ability of the state to fund other programs that are equally important. And they point out that if enrollment declines, this would reduce the flexibility to shift funding from schools to other programs. Here are the numbers as of yesterday. And it looks like there has actually been no money raised on a campaign to defeat this proposition, but a fair amount has been raised to support it. So, in a nutshell, if you vote yes on Prop 28, it means that the state would have to provide specific funding specifically for arts and music education in public schools above the amount already constitutionally required. A no vote means that funding for arts education in public schools would continue as it currently is and depend on state and local budget decisions. Mandy, back to you.
Okay, so now I'll talk about Prop 29, which deals with It would require dialysis clinics to have at least one doctor, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant present during patient treatments. Again, this is an initiative where supporters gathered signatures at a cost of about $21.50 per signature. If this proposition looks familiar, it should, because an almost identical one was on the ballot in 2020. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Just some background, about 80,000 Californians receive hemodialysis each month in one of 650 dialysis centers in California. The treatment is usually done 3 times a week, lasting about 4 hours, and most clinics are open 6 days a week. Nearly 3/4 of these clinics are owned by 2 for-profit companies, DaVita Incorporated and Fresenius Medical Care. The California Department of Public Health is responsible for licensing dialysis clinics and applies federal regulations. Currently, all dialysis clinics must be licensed to receive Medicare and Medi-Cal payments. A board-certified medical doctor must be affiliated with each center and be responsible for the quality of care, staff training, and clinic practices. Federal law also requires reports to the National Healthcare Safety Network on kidney-related infections. As I mentioned, this proposition probably looks familiar because this is the 3rd proposition that has been supported by SEIU, United Health Workers West, a labor union for healthcare workers. There was one in 2018 and one in 2020, and neither passed. Okay, so what would happen if it is passed? If passed, Proposition 29 would require at least one licensed clinician to be on site during treatment at a dialysis clinic. And that would be an MD, a nurse practitioner, or a physician assistant. It would require clinics to provide patients with a list of all physicians who have a 5% or higher ownership interest in the clinic and report this every 3 months to the state. Failure to do so would result in a $100,000 fine. It would require dialysis-related infections to be reported to a state agency and mandate state approval for clinics to close or reduce services. Clinics would also have to offer the same level of care to all patients, regardless of source of payment, private insurance, or Medicare, Medi-Cal. So what are the financial impacts? The financial impact on state and local government is uncertain, but if it passes, clinic owners will most likely negotiate higher insurance payments to offset increased staffing. The impact of the state budget would likely be in the low tens of millions of dollars annually for increased costs for Medi-Cal patients, as well as increased administrative responsibilities. So who's supporting this? So you can see here are the 2 groups, as I mentioned. SEIU UHW West is a union that has brought the previous 2 propositions to the ballot as well. Their rationale is that they think a trained clinician is needed on site during patient treatment for improving oversight. They believe that patients and the public should know who owns the clinics and who will profit from treatment. The proponents also want to make sure that no one is turned away to source of payment and that service for everyone is comparable. And finally, they want the dialysis companies are making a windfall profit of about 18%, and they want some of these profits to be spent on improving oversight and care. Those who are against are listed again on this slide. The opponents say that Proposition 29, if passed, would increase dialysis treatment costs by hundreds of millions of dollars every year, and that nearly half of the clinics in the state might become financially unsustainable and forced to close. They say that requiring on-site clinicians is unnecessary for patient safety. Only 8 other states have similar requirements, and there's no evidence that these staffing requirements have improved care. Data from Medicare shows that California has lower infection rates than states with stricter staffing requirements, and nurses and dialysis technicians are adequately trained to administer dialysis and respond to special needs. Finally, the opponents say that the proposition could result in a shortage of doctors and other necessary areas of care. Again, here is the money slide. I'll give you a second to see who has supported and opposed this financially. And then to summarize, yes vote means dialysis clinics would be required to have a physician, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant on site during all patient treatment hours. No means dialysis clinics would not be required to have one of these clinicians on site during all patient hours. Okay, Rosette.
Thank you, Mandy. We're getting close.
Yeah.
Here's Proposition 30 would create a new tax on any individual's income of more than $2 million per year. It would use this money to increase electric car usage and manage wildfires. It's an initiative statute, and supporters gathered signatures at a cost of about $13.50 per signature. So we'll start with background. As we all know, California is experiencing a severe drought and increasing wildfires and poor air quality. Gas-powered cars and wildfire smoke are two major contributors of greenhouse gas in the state. And other thing to know is that the cost for wildfire suppression and prevention are increasing as these fires become more catastrophic. State has been responding to these circumstances, these increasingly worse situation. A state law was passed requiring California to reduce its greenhouse gas emission level to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030, that's 8 years from now. State law also requires ride-sharing companies such as Lyft and Uber to convert 90% of their vehicles to zero-emission vehicles, but also by 2030. And on August 25th, the governor announced a plan requiring 100% of new vehicles sold by 1935 to be zero-emission vehicles. The state recently committed to spending $10 billion over the next 5 years on increasing zero-emission vehicles in the state, and is currently spending between $2 and $4 billion annually on wildfire response. So the revenues from Prop 30 would theoretically supplement funds already allocated to achieve these goals and these programs. So here's the skinny on Prop 30. It would increase the personal income tax rate on incomes above $2 million to 1.75%. The current marginal tax rate on high income earners, roughly over $1 million, it's currently 13.3%. If Prop 30 passes, that rate would increase to 15.0. It says 05. I think that might be a typo. Is it 15.03?
Yeah.
5 and 3. 15.08. Sorry, % on all personal taxable income, only on income over $2 million. The tax would end on January 1st, 2043 if greenhouse gases drop to a specific level, the one that I mentioned before, and funds from Prop 30 would be allocated as follows. 45% to promote purchase of zero-emission vehicles, 35% to increase availability of electric charging stations, for a total of 80% of the revenues would be going towards those two things. It's basically zero-emission vehicle access. And then the remaining 20% would help fund wildfire suppression and prevention. The proposition stipulates that at least 50% of the funds allocated for zero-emission vehicles and the charging stations must benefit primarily low-income and disadvantaged communities. And then the 20% that is going to wildfire suppression and prevention, it requires that CAL FIRE have as its top priority in using up these funds, it must be to hire and train additional firefighters. So here is the fiscal impact. It could generate between almost $3 billion to $4 billion for zero emission vehicles, for funding for those items, and about $700 million to $1 billion for wildfire response. And these revenues could increase over time. So here's your list of supporters. And here's what they say. They say that the problem that we're facing is enormous and that the existing programs are insufficient to address California's poor air quality. More must be done to make electric vehicles more affordable and to prevent catastrophic wildfires. They say that there will be strict accountability to ensure that the funds are spent as they're intended. And many environmentalists respond to the complaint about LIFT's support of this bill to say that it's helpful and it's really insignificant compared to the problems that we're facing. Supporters describe the proposition as a Robin Hood act that will help people without the means to buy an electric car. Here's a list of the opponents, and they say that California is already investing more than $50 billion in climate issues, including the $10 billion for zero emission vehicles over the next 5 years. And they say that additional funding can be paid for from the state's budget surplus. They say that there's no guarantee that Prop 30 will make zero emission vehicles affordable for most Californians. They say that Prop 30 locks in money from income taxes to special interests, keeping it away from school funding. And they claim that Prop 30 is LIFT's attempt to get taxpayers to help foot the bill for the law that requires their fleet to be 90% electric by 2030. Here are the numbers. Almost approaching $50 million on the support side, and about 20 on the negative, on the opponent side. Next slide. So your vote. If you vote yes, you are voting to impose an additional tax of 1.75% on personal income above $2 million. A no vote means that there would be no changes to any taxes, but specifically to taxes on personal income above $2 million. Andy?
Okay, we're at the last of the propositions.
Of
Prop
statewide.
31. What's that?
Of the statewide proposition.
Of the statewide proposition, not the measures, yeah. Of the statewide propositions. And this one deals with flavored tobacco products. So Prop 31 would ban the sale of certain flavored tobacco products at retail stores or vending machines by allowing State Bill 793, which was passed in 2020, to go into effect. This is a referendum which came to the ballot after opponents of the legislature's action gathered signatures at a cost of $22 per signature. So this is a little confusing. The legislature passed this law banning the sale of flavored tobacco products. But in California, if you get enough signatures, you can have what's called a veto referendum and make the law, the approval of the law, be a proposition on the ballot. So that's what happened in this case. So the background on this is that, again, that bill was actually signed into law by 84 of 89 Democrats and a quarter of Republicans. And again, it would ban non-tobacco flavored products being sold directly to individuals. The ban includes such things as flavored juices, which are used to vape, menthol cigarettes, chewing tobacco, flavored cigarillos, but excludes both hookah, and premium cigars. The new law was not implemented due to this veto referendum. Now, in 2009, the federal government banned the sale of non-tobacco flavored cigarettes, except menthol. But state and local governments can regulate the sales and use of tobacco and can mandate stricter rules than the federal government. For example, California restricted the age for purchase of tobacco products to those 21 and over before the federal government did. And actually right now, about a third of Californians, for example, those in LA, live in areas where certain sales of flavored tobacco products are already banned, most of which include a ban on menthol cigarettes. So this is a referendum which asks the voters to approve the law that was already passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. The law cannot be enforced until the election is held. Your vote on the proposition will affirm the law or reject it. So a yes vote means that you approve the law that the legislature created and signed into existence. So the fiscal impact, if Proposition 31 is approved, it may reduce state tobacco tax revenue by tens of millions up to $100 million a year due to loss of revenue from sale of these products. But there's a wide variation in estimates because smokers may switch from flavored to non-flavored tobacco products, so the impact wouldn't be that great. Prop 31 could also have an effect on costs because the state pays for healthcare for employees and qualifying low-income residents. If Prop 31 passes and leads to reduced tobacco use, healthcare costs could be lower due to better health. So thus, the net change in the state and local government healthcare costs is uncertain, and thus also the amount of tax revenues from tobacco sales. So here are the supporters of the proposition. They say that flavored tobacco is a gateway to addiction among children. They say that big tobacco has spent millions of dollars to ensure California retailers can keep selling candy flavored products to children. More than 2 million middle and high school students in the United States now use e-cigarettes, many because of the flavors. 4 out of 5 young people who have used tobacco started with a flavored product. Those against, and again, you can see who they are, kind of ambiguous, but these opponents say the law is unfair since lawmakers have exempted hookah tobacco, expensive cigars, and actually also flavored pipe tobacco from the prohibition. They say Prop 31 will hurt small businesses and jobs as products are pushed from licensed retailers to an underground market. And this will lead to increased youth access, crime, and other social concerns. They point also to the loss of that valuable tax revenue for the state. So again, here's the money slide. You can see who those, I'll just give you a second. And you can go to the summary. So yes, a yes vote on this means retail stores and vending machines would not be able to sell most flavored tobacco products and tobacco product flavor enhancers. No means retail stores and vending machines could continue to sell these products as allowed under other federal, state, and local rules. Okay, back to Rosette.
Okay, our final proposition before we stop for questions and answers. Hopefully answers to your questions. This is Measure A. It is the only countywide measure on the ballot, and it would change the county's code of regulatory ordinances to create a new tax on all cannabis businesses that operate in the unincorporated area of the county. So we'll start with some background. Legal cannabis businesses must charge a 15% state excise tax and a local sales and use tax. They already do that. Some incorporated cities in the county also impose charges on cannabis businesses beyond California's 15% excise tax and local sales and use taxes. Gross receipts taxes or annual fees are charged by the city of San Diego, Chula Vista, La Mesa, Lemon Grove, National City, Oceanside, and Vista. The city of Encinitas does not currently have that kind of a tax, but it is considering such a tax in this election, which we'll talk about later. So here's what Measure A would do. It would create a new tax on all cannabis businesses that operate in the unincorporated area of San Diego County. It would allow a maximum gross receipts tax of 6% on quarterly retail sales and less on other operations such as manufacturing, distribution, cultivation, testing labs. The tax would be above and beyond the state excise and sales and use taxes. It would allow the Board of Supervisors to change the rate of the tax, but they would not be able to repeal the tax or set a rate higher than the maximum amount that we would be approving, the 6% maximum, without voter approval. It would levy the tax only on activity on businesses conducted in the unincorporated area. And if a business operates both within and without the unincorporated area, it would only be the business that's taking place in the unincorporated area. It would provide tax relief in the event of disaster or crop failures, and all revenues generated by this tax would go into the county general fund. So the fiscal impacts, it's expected to generate about almost $3 million to about $5.5 million in revenue. There would be some costs to administer the tax of a little over $300,000. The Board of Supervisors could make more commercial cannabis permits available in the unincorporated area in the spring or summer of 2024. I don't know if I mentioned it already. I should have, but there are currently 5 authorized cannabis businesses operating in the unincorporated area of the county. Do I remember that correctly, Mandy?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know why I didn't mention that. So here's what supporters, you can see who the supporters are. And here's what they say. They say it is a bipartisan solution to advance a safe, regulated, and legal adult cannabis market in San Diego County, keeping the tax revenues in the county to fund parks, fire safety, roads, health, social equity, and it will allow increased enforcement of illegal cannabis operations. They also say that the tax will be paid solely by cannabis businesses in the unincorporated communities of the county, and the tax will not apply to cannabis businesses in cities and would not be a double tax. Let's see, you see a list of opponents, and what they say is that it will expand the sale of cannabis products. They say the tax is unfair because it only applies to businesses in unincorporated San Diego County, while the revenue could be used for programs throughout the county and unrelated programs as well. And they say that since the tax only applies in unincorporated San Diego County, only the voters who live in unincorporated San Diego County should be allowed to vote on the measure. So a yes vote means that you would be in favor of establishing a cannabis business tax in the unincorporated area of the county. A no means you would be against establishing this business tax in the unincorporated area of the county. So with that, we're going to take a pause and open it up to questions. And one of our colleagues, another league member, Mary Thompson, who heads up the pros and cons activity for the league, has been monitoring the questions in the Q&A. And I think, Mary, you're going to come on now and let us know what's going on in the Q&A.
Hey, thank you both, Mandy and Rosette, really terrific. We've had one question. What reasons does Governor Newsom give for opposing Prop 30?
Do you want me to take that, Rosette?
Please.
So he is worried for a couple of reasons. First of all, he's concerned we already have the highest income tax rate in the country, state of California. He is worried that raising that income tax for those who make over $2 million and above will further drive people out of the state. That's one of his worries. He also looks at this as a kind of a ploy, I would say, on the behalf of Lyft and Uber to get the state to subsidize their drivers having to have a fleet of 90% electric vehicles by, is it 2030 or I think 2030?
Yeah.
So he thinks Lyft is, very in support of this because it really helps them out. And it's using this state. There's also a very complicated area which involves something called the GAN limit, which I'm not going to try and explain, but it deals with the fact that if the state raises too much in tax revenue, there are penalties basically for the state where what they can spend money on is more restricted. And I believe 1 year, they actually even had to give a rebate back to citizens. So he has several reasons for opposing it.
Thank you. No other questions?
No.
Okay.
I hope that means we've been explaining it well. So Mandy, why don't you begin?
Do we want to tell people what we're going to do?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, so now we're going to do the local city propositions. We have a Carlsbad proposition, an Encinitas proposition, a Solana Beach proposition, and then followed by 3 City of Escondido propositions. So we'll be doing those and in that order.
Okay. So the first one we're going to deal with is Measure J, which is a measure that would allow the city of Carlsbad to spend funds in excess of $1 million to renovate the Monroe Street Pool. So a citizen initiative in 1982 requires a public vote on any real property improvements other than routine maintenance and repairs over $1 million. So the city of Carlsbad desires to renovate and expand the existing Monroe Street Pool. And the cost estimates for this range from 22 to 24 million, thus requiring a public vote. So the city council, the Carlsbad City Council unanimously voted to make improvements to the Monroe Street Pool. The pool, which was built in 1982, the pool was built in 1982, and the proposed improvements would expand the pool and auxiliary associated facilities, add family restrooms, and upgrade, update, and modernize the pool infrastructure. It would also make other energy efficiency and building code upgrades. The city council obtained public input and selected this option from 3 different proposals. If approved, again, the measure would authorize but not require the city to spend up to 24 million on the Monroe Street Pool project. The funds would come from existing city funds, including the general fund. So if the measure is not approved, the money earmarked for this project just would remain in the city's general fund and be spent on for other purposes. The pool staff suggests that there would be ongoing costs for pool maintenance in the event it is not upgraded, but no estimates were provided for the maintenance costs. So here's who's supporting this. The supporters say the improvements are projected to extend the life of the facility for another 40 years. The improvements are consistent with the city's climate action plan in improving the energy efficiency of the facility. And they say that high quality recreational facilities contribute to Carlsbad's quality of life. No arguments were submitted opposing the measure. So if we go here, just to summarize, yes means you're in favor of authorizing the city to spend up to $24 million on the Monroe Street Pool project, and no means you're against. Okay, Rosette?
Okay, thank you, Mandy. Moving on to Measure L, which I mentioned when I was talking about Measure A. This is an Encinitas, City of Encinitas measure that would impose a general tax on cannabis businesses in Encinitas. The city council submitted this measure to the ballot. So as I mentioned, when I was talking about Prop A, there is a state excise tax of 15% on cannabis businesses Additionally, a sales tax of between 8 and 10% is applied on top of the excise tax. Almost all cities and counties that have cannabis businesses impose a business tax of between 3 and 10% for retail sales, as well as taxes on other non-retail cannabis activities such as cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, and others. So in November 2020, Encinitas voters passed Measure H, which allowed for a minimum of 4 retail cannabis businesses, along with some non-retail businesses. Measure H was a citizen initiative, and it did not include any business tax provisions in that bill. So again, many other San Diego area municipalities charge a cannabis business tax, and this County of San Diego is also got a measure on the ballot, Measure A, to impose exactly that, another business tax on cannabis businesses. So that's the background. What would Measure L do? It would allow the Encinitas City Council to impose a cannabis business tax of between 4 and 7% of retail product sales price, and a lower tax rate on non-retail proceeds. Cannabis, commercial cannabis or hemp cultivation would be taxed by a different method. The proposed cannabis business tax is a general tax, and Measure L would take effect 10 days after certification of the election, and it requires only a 50% plus 1 majority vote in order to pass. So the fiscal effects, according to the Encinitas City Attorney, this measure, if it were passed, would generate an estimated $800,000 to $1.4 million annually. But we don't have an estimate of the increased cost to the city for the addition of cannabis businesses. So here is a list of supporters. It was unanimously supported by the Encinitas City Council, and what they say is that the revenue generated from this business tax could be used to mitigate impacts on safety, law enforcement, fire protection, emergency medical services, traffic, parking, and other services. And it says that funds generated from this measure could assist Encinitas in closing illegal cannabis businesses. They also say that it would be a new source of funding, and they point out the fact that all taxes would stay, all revenues would stay in Encinitas. There were no opposing arguments submitted. So a yes means that you would be in favor of authorizing a cannabis business tax on gross receipts, and a no means you would not want to authorize a cannabis business tax on gross receipts.
Okay, the next one affects voters in Solana Beach. It's Measure S, and it would add a 1 cent sales tax in Solana Beach. It would increase the sales tax in Solana Beach by 1 cent to 8.75%. The current sales tax in Solana Beach, as I mentioned, is 7.75, of which the city of Solana Beach receives 1% directly. The average sales tax in California is 7.25, but the average in San Diego County is 7.75, or the standard in San Diego County. In recent years, the city reports that it has not received adequate revenue from existing sources to build needed roads, park, and infrastructure. The proposed increase of the tax by 1%, as I said, would increase sales tax to 8.75%. If the measure were to pass, Solana Beach would join Oceanside, Imperial Beach, Vista, La Mesa, El Cajon, and Del Mar that also have additional sales taxes above that 7.75%. The measure passes with a 50% plus 1 majority. The city approved a proposal to allow the voters of the city of San Diego to establish an additional 1 cent sales tax. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, The revenue to maintain and prevent cuts to city services such as maintaining streets, parks, benches, infrastructure, and storm drains, paramedics and 911 emergency response, fire protection, traffic management, trash removal, and addressing homelessness and other services. Okay. The fiscal impact, the city anticipates generating about $3 million in additional annual revenue from the increase in the sales tax. The new sales tax revenue would be audited and reported upon as a separate fund in the annual independent audit for all general fund revenues. Here's who's supporting it. Again, supporters say Measure S will keep the money raised in Solana Beach. Measure S allows more investment in park and road improvements and continued top-notch fire and sheriff services. It notes that since much of the city's sales tax revenue comes from visitor spending, it allows non-residents to help fund local services. And no arguments were submitted opposing it. So again, yes means you're in favor of authorizing a 1-cent sales tax increase, and no means you're against the increase. Okay.
Moving on to Escondido. The last three are all measures related to the city of Escondido. This one's Measure E. It would establish an additional 3/4 cent sales tax in Escondido for 15 years. So the present sales tax in Escondido is 7.75. Again, the city receives 1% of those, of that revenue. The rest goes to the state or to others. Escondido's revenues have not kept pace with the growing costs associated with the municipal services and that they need to provide and maintenance of facilities. And they're currently in a deficit situation. The city has aggressively responded to their financial challenges by reducing their workforce below pre-recession levels, reducing their pension obligations, deferring maintenance, and cutting back on services despite serving a larger population. Part of the deficit involves pension obligations, which have almost doubled in the last 5 years. The city commissioned a poll in 2019 and found that 69% of voters would support a tax increase, while 23% were opposed. If the measure were to pass, Escondido would join 8 other cities in San Diego County with the local sales tax above the 7.75% county standard. So here's what Measure E would do. It would increase the sales tax within the city of Escondido by 3/4 cent to 8.5% for 15 years. It would direct the proceeds from the tax increase to Escondido's general fund for unrestricted general revenue purposes. It would direct the city manager to report the annual spending plan to ensure revenues are used to improve public safety, infrastructure, the delivery of public services, and to help solve the city's structural deficit. And it would establish a citizens oversight committee to ensure compliance with all of these requirements. So it's believed that it would generate, that this increase in the sales tax would generate about $21 million annually. To put this into context, the city's operating budget for the current fiscal year is $125.7 million. This measure is intended to deal with an $8.5 million deficit for this fiscal year and projections of a regular annual deficit of between $3 million and $12 million for the next 18 years. The county has already deployed one-time funds from the American Rescue Plan Act. They've imposed a hiring moratorium, and they've reduced spending on the California Center for the Arts by nearly $2 million in an attempt to deal with the deficit. So here are your supporters, and what they say is that it will ensure Escondido can fully fund its most important priorities, including public safety, renewing infrastructure, addressing homelessness, and maintaining a safe and clean city. They point out that Measure A is not a tax on homes or property and does not apply to groceries or prescription medicine. And they also point out that it would keep all taxpayer dollars, or this taxpayer revenue, local. Opponents say that Measure E is a massive tax hike that will cost a typical Escondido family $200 or more per year in additional sales tax. And it does not require politicians to spend the new sales tax on the services claimed in the name of safety, traffic, and homelessness, but instead will divert proceeds to pension payouts to city workers. So if you vote yes in Escondido, you are in favor of adding a 3/4 cent sales tax for the next 15 years. If you vote no, you would, you're voting against adding that 3/4 cent sales tax.
Okay, second to last one. This is Measure F, again, only affecting Escondido, and it would establish term limits for the mayor, city council members, and city treasurer in Escondido. Currently, no term limits apply for elected offices in Escondido. Elected officials serve a 4-year term, and an official can be reelected or appointed to a specific office, mayor, council member, or treasurer, consecutively or with interruption without any limit. Oceanside, Chula Vista, Coronado, San Diego, La Mesa, National City, and San Marcos have established term limits. The Escondido City Council initiated Measure F to establish the maximum number of term limits for an official in a specific office. So you can see here, it would be 2 term limits for mayor, 3 for council member, and 3 for treasurer. The proposed ordinance defines a term as 2 or more years in office after election or appointment to the office. If passed, the term limits would go into effect beginning November 8th, 2022. No fiscal effect has been identified. Here are those who support it. Supporters say that 68% of Escondido residents surveyed in December 21 favored term limits, and California authorizes adoption of term limits, and no opposing arguments were submitted. So yes means you're in favor of adopting term limits for elected officials in Escondido, and no means you are not. Okay, last one, Rosette.
Okay, here we are at the end. Measure G would also City of Escondido, and would reduce the city treasurer's compensation, and also change the way vacancies for elected offices are filled. Would be changed. It would change that. So some background. The office of treasurer is not aligned with other elected positions in the city in terms of compensation or the process for filling a vacancy. The city council establishes compensation amounts for the mayor and city council members, but compensation for the city treasurer is set by the voters, because the voters set the city treasurer compensation by initiative some time back. And so now only voters can change compensation for the city treasurer. In 2022, the city treasurer in Escondido will receive more than $150,000 in total compensation. Council members' total annual compensation is approximately $50,000. The city council determined that the city treasurer position is actually a part-time position, and the compensation was inconsistent with the job being performed. So that's the compensation piece. With regards to filling a position, a special election to fill the position, if a vacancy occurs, is required if the vacancy occurs during the first 3 years of a term. If a treasurer vacancy occurs during the 4th year of a term, the deputy treasurer will perform duties of the treasurer for the remainder of the term. So for the treasurer, if the vacancy occurs in the first 3 years, the city is required to hold a special election. That's not the case with city council members. So the city council voted unanimously to put this measure on the ballot. So here's what would happen if Measure G passes. It would reduce city treasurer annual compensation to the same level as city council members. It would standardize the process for all vacant elected positions, mayor, council member, and treasurer. The process in place used to fill mayor or council vacancies would be used for any treasurer vacancy, giving the city council the option to appoint an interim treasurer and avoid special election expenses, estimated at $500,000. Measure G requires a simple majority to pass and would go into effect immediately. So the impartial analysis by the city suggests that, as we said, a savings of approximately $100,000 because city treasurer's compensation would be reduced, and the city could avoid up to $500,000 in expenses if the council chose to appoint rather than hold special elections when a vacancy occurred. So here are the supporters, and they say that this measure would put the city in line with how other jurisdictions operate. It allows the city council to set treasurer compensation as with the other elected offices. It would address differences between the compensation of the city's elected officials. And they say appointing an elected official when a vacancy occurs avoids special election costly expenses. So there were some opponents, and you can see who they are, and they say that this is not a prudent way to manage compensation. They say that city salaries are too high and that the treasurer should be appointed. So here we go. A yes vote means you're in favor of adjusting the city treasurer's compensation and standardizing the process for filling vacancies of elected offices, and a no means no change to treasurer's compensation and the way vacancies are filled. And there we are at the end. And on this last slide, again, we are giving you some websites that you might want to visit. Voters Edge is the one that has the information about money, how much money is being spent on each campaign. And we'll open it back up to questions. Mary, I don't know if there are any questions, but I want to let you know that if you think of a question later, you can go to our website, lwvncsd.org, and we have an FAQ section on the website where you can read through other questions that people have asked, or you can submit a question and we will respond to you if you leave your email address. Thank you so much for your time. Well, let's go to Mary. Do we have any questions?
No, we don't have any other questions. Thank you both.
Great. Well, Mandy, thank you for partnering with me this morning, and thank you so much to the audience who joined us this morning, both members and the public. We hope this was useful to you. And again, I encourage you to support the League by becoming a member or by donating. Mandy, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day and a great weekend.